Hello, Glowforge community. My name is Jason Lichtman, and I am a technical specialist for design and manufacturing here at Autodesk. I am also a very proud Glowforge Pro owner. You can find me on the forums as @SecretSauce. And today we're going to be going over a new post processor for Fusion 360 and the Glowforge. So you probably are sending files from Fusion 360 to your Glowforge right now. And in order to do that, you're probably right-clicking on a sketch, saving it as a DXF, sending it to some other program like Adobe Illustrator or maybe Inkscape, maybe doing some cleanup, and then sending it to the Glowforge user interface. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could go straight from Fusion 360 straight to the Glowforge? I think so. Now, we do have a post processor on the CAM side of Fusion 360 for the Glowforge. However, it is a very, very simple SVG creator. All it does is create any kind of toolpaths you want and creates it into an SVG. It does have some issues, and so most people find that it's not as helpful as they would like. However, and therefore they just don't use it. But luckily, we have a forum member at Gareth, also known as Gareth Farrington, who is an absolutely incredible software programmer. And with his help, we've created a new Glowforge post. It is in process of being scrutinized by the Autodesk CAM post processor gurus, and will hopefully be live within Fusion 360 shortly. But in the meantime, you do have the ability to download that post processor and give it a try yourself. This video is going to serve as an instruction on what the differences are between the original post processor and this one, as well as we'll give you instructions on how to install it, and then also how to use it, how to set it up, and how to actually use it, what all the options are. Credit really does go to Gareth Farrington. He's incredible. I gave some feedback along the way, but all of the really heavy lifting was definitely on his part. So please make sure to credit him with all of the awesomeness as you guys find it. And so let's jump right in. Throughout this video, keep in mind that it is unscripted, and so we will very likely run into problems. If we do, we're just going to move right along. And also keep in mind that if I'm going a little bit too slowly for you, you can use the gear icon in YouTube and speed me up, or if I'm going too fast for you, you could either rewatch that portion of the video or slow me down. Either way is totally fine. If you have any feedback or comments based on this video itself, please let us know. If you would like to download the post, there will be a link in the description of the video that'll tell you where you can actually go and download it. But again, the eventual goal is that it's going to be built right into Fusion, and so you'll be able to find it right there. We are going to use Adobe Illustrator today, in addition to the Glowforge user interface, to be able to show some kind of nitpicky things that you wouldn't notice from the Glowforge user interface itself, and also to demonstrate the workflow, because there are going to be times where you're probably still going to want to go from Fusion 360 to Illustrator or Inkscape or some other 2D vector program, and then from that program over to the Glowforge user interface. And so we are going to use Adobe Illustrator and Fusion 360 as well as the Glowforge web app today. We're going to start off by showing you how to, actually not showing you how to install it. We're going to start off by showing you the difference between the current post processor and the new one. Then we're going to show you how to install it. Then we're going to show you how to set it up and actually use it. Let's begin. Video is turning off, and you should be able to see my screen from now on, but not this lovely face. Excellent. All right, so right now you could see in Fusion 360 I have a pretty boring generic file up. This is the file that Gareth and I have been using for most of our testing. And you could see that it is a pretty simple square with rounded corners and two cutaway holes of different sizes, and then another box off to the side. And it doesn't have to be really fancy to do our testing or to do our instructions, so that's what we're going to use for now. Of course, I hope that you guys end up making something way more beautiful than you could see right here. All right, so let's go and take a deep dive. All right, we're going to go and post-process this right away. I'm going to show you the original post processor and what the results would look like. We're going to save this on my desktop. Let's go and choose our desktop. And we're going to name this 1001. And there we go. And by the way, inside of this particular file, I have 5 different cutting paths. So you should see 5 different cutting paths in our result as well. We're going to go ahead and open this in Illustrator to start. We're going to go and open 1001.svg. And you don't see on the artboard the actual cutting file. In fact, to be able to see it, you're going to have to zoom out quite a bit and look off into space right over here. And if we zoom in over there, you'll be able to see the actual paths. And that's part of one of the problems we're actually going to solve in the new post processor, is being able to automatically center all of your cutting paths within the Glowforge bed, which I think is going to be very, very useful to most people. All right, so here I'm going to turn on the colors again. And although I have a gray background and it makes it hard to see, you could see that I have red cut for the outside of this. I have a red cut for this hole. And then I also have a red cut for the perimeter of this box. One thing to note, though, is the lines themselves are really thin, so they're hard to see. Also, like the segments of the arcs and the lines, none of them are connected. So I would have to do a whole bunch of cleanup where I select many of these together and do object path join to be able to make, you know, one solid object out of it. Maybe I could skip that and go straight to the Glowforge user interface and don't really need it. But if I'm doing post-processing in Illustrator, that would definitely be something that's very annoying. Also notice that all of the cuts are the same color and all of the scores are the same color. I can't choose the order at this point to be able to say, hey, I want to cut the center holes first, then I want to cut the perimeter last. Right now, all the cuts would just be grouped together and all the scores grouped together. And again, remember that the position of this thing is off in space, somewhere that would be hard to find. Let's go back to Fusion 360, and now we're going to go and post-process the same file. We're going to name this one number 2, but we're going to use the new post-processor that Gareth calls Glowforge Colorific, because each operation is going to get its own color. And we do have a whole bunch of different options here, some of which I've already modified, and we'll go over that in a little bit more detail in just a little bit. And we're going to save this as 1002.svg, and then we're going to go and open that over here in Illustrator. Excellent. Now here you could see that it is automatically centered, so big win right off the bat. Awesome, go Gareth. Second thing is that the stroke width is much thicker, and that was one of the options that I modified. I made the stroke width 1 millimeter so I could see it a little bit more easily. Does this matter for the Glowforge user interface? Absolutely not. But if you're doing anything in Illustrator or Inkscape or anything like that, that stroke width is going to be very helpful. So keep that in mind. And then also notice that everything is colored differently. Even this blue box, which is a fill that's blue, is a different color blue than this outer one. And so when I bring this over to the Glowforge user interface, and we can bring that up right now and upload this, 1002, you'll see that here it's going to have 4, and no, I think we counted 5 different operations from Fusion. You're going to end up with 5 different operations here as well. I'm actually only counting 4, so let's go and double check our Fusion file. 1, 2, 3. 2 of these are really the same, which is why you're only getting 4. So if you go into the Glowforge app, you could see that each of these is showing up separate. And also keep in mind that if you look at any of these, you can see that some of them are actually fills and some of them are strokes. And that's based on what you chose in Fusion 360 on whether this is going to be a cut or this is going to be an engrave. And so when you go over to Illustrator, same thing, you're going to see that some of these are fills, like the pink and this dark, like navyish blue, and those are going to be more of your engraves versus score or cut. And so we're trying to make it just quicker and easier to select your options automatically. So if you're in the Glowforge user interface and you say, hey, I'm going to just use proof grade, then it'll automatically assign engrave or cut to whatever you'd like. We don't have a way right now to separate it to be able to do scores, but that's easy enough for you to just say, hey, you know what, I really wanted this to be a score instead of a cut. All right, pretty quick. But from engrave versus cut/score, that is automatically set up. Now, there are some other benefits of Gareth's post processor, but we're going to jump in and start to show you how to install it and then how to actually start using it. So let's go over how to install it. Here I am in Fusion 360, and if I go to Actions, Post Process, you're going to see that I have a whole bunch of different options here. And at the very top is what's called the configuration folder. This is really like your post library. And under Setup here, you get to choose where you want to be looking for posts. And in my opinion, there are really two places you should be looking. It's installed post library, which is going to be the posts that come from Autodesk itself that are not modified other than the options down below, and personal post library, which is going to be for when you download your own post processor or very heavily customize a post processor that you downloaded from anywhere, including Autodesk. So if I go to the personal post library, you're going to see that this is where all of the posts are stored. If I go to installed posts, it'll show you here is where we install the post on your machine. This is a much more complicated folder structure. But if you go to personal post library and then you copy this URL, you could then go and paste this into Windows Explorer. We'll go in here, and you'll see that here I have two posts that I've already placed here. So in this case, you're going to download the Glowforge Colorific Post Processor, and all you have to do is download it into this folder, or download it wherever you want, and then cut and paste it into this folder. And once it's here, Fusion 360 will be able to find it. So it's that simple. That's all you have to do to install the post itself. All right, so topic number one, how to install the post, covered. Now let's talk about how to actually set everything up to actually work in Fusion. The first thing you're going to want to do is to create a tool library for your laser beam. All right, so for that, we're going to go under Manage, Tool Library, and we can create the tool library in a number of places, including what we call the Cloud Library. And Cloud Library, I think, is great because it's going to go with you from account to account. Sorry, I said that wrong. From computer to computer with your account, as opposed to it being stuck in a particular file. So I like to use the Cloud Library. I would, in fact, turn off all the sample libraries like this and turn off maybe, yeah, I would just click on Cloud. And then over here, you could see you could add a new milling tool, a holder, a turning tool, or a water jet laser or plasma cutting tool. So we're going to choose this, and then a pop-up is going to come up. Hold on. We actually have to make a new tool library here. So we're going to make a new one called Glowforge Laser Beams. Excellent. And you might be thinking to yourself right off the bat, well, my Glowforge only has one laser beam. Why do I need to make multiple? You're going to end up making one of these for each different kerf. And if you don't know what kerf means, think about this. When you cut a piece of wood in a chop saw or a bandsaw or a table saw, the blade itself has a width, and it's pretty wide. You could see it, right? A laser beam, believe it or not, even though it's much smaller, does have a width to the beam, and that's called the kerf. And if you have looked around the Glowforge forums, you would have seen that the topic of kerf compensation comes up quite a bit. If you are going to cut a circular disc and a circular hole, and you want the disc to fit in the hole perfectly, you can't just cut the same circle on both for the disc and for the hole. If you do, you'd end up with a slight gap in between, and that gap is the width of the beam, that kerf. So kerf compensation is saying, hey, for the disc, let's move the beam slightly outside of that circle, so that the result is exactly the size circle that I wanted. And for the hole, let's actually move the beam slightly in to be able to achieve the same end result. And if you do that, you're going to end up with the perfect fit between your disc and your hole. So how are we going to do this in the Glowforge? Well, in the Glowforge, we're going to create a new tool for water jet laser or plasma. We are going to call it by the name of whatever the material is that we're going to cut. So in this case, I'm going to call this medium proof grade walnut. Okay, and then for the cutter, we're going to choose, we want it to be laser. I get to choose whatever unit system I prefer, millimeters or inches. I typically am a millimeters kind of guy, but we'll go with inches right now. And then we're going to choose the kerf width. Now for you, I would like for you to go online and search how to determine the kerf for your particular material. And once you find out what that kerf should be, then you're going to type that width right here. Now, in order to make this easier to see visually for the rest of the video, I'm going to put a really big size kerf. I'm going to use 1/4 of an inch. There we go, 1/4 of an inch, so that you'll actually be able to see this really, really well. But in reality, this is going to be a much, much smaller number for you. The nozzle clearance diameter does not matter whatsoever for your Glowforge, so you can ignore that. The holder does not matter. The feeds and speeds do not matter. Post processor here also do not matter. So the only thing you're going to need is to make sure you have a really good description and the cutter kerf width is what you want. Okay, now here I have one of these, but imagine if I cut walnut, medium proof grade walnut, my kerf might be very narrow. But if I'm cutting something much thicker, then I might have a very different kerf. So for you, you're going to end up creating a new one of these for each and every different kerf you're going to end up needing, meaning any material that has a different kerf, you're going to want a different, quote unquote, laser beam with its own kerf setting. So I'm gonna make some pretend ones, and they're all gonna be really big. So we're gonna have 1/2 inch, and this one's gonna be called, I'm just pretending here, like 0.5 inch pine, right? And then maybe we made another one, and this one's gonna be called 0.375 inch, we'll just call it thin leather or something like that. And then again, the cutter is going to be, some amount. I'll leave this one as the default for now, and we'll make that laser and just say okay. So in this case, I have 3 different options. For you, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 20, or maybe it's just one. Use it for everything. Just keep in mind that you're going to want to create different laser, quote unquote, tools for each different kerf setting you're going to want to use. So this is step 1. Set up your laser beam kerf. Step number 2 is the actual part you're going to cut. So here I have my 2 objects, and I'm going to go and create a setup. That's the first thing you need to do, is define what's the stock that I'm starting with. So we're going to go and say setup, new setup, and it automatically knows that I want to cut these 2 objects. But if I only really wanted to cut one of them, I could change this under model and say, hey, I only want to cut this one. And what we default to here is we default, by the way, you want to change your operation type to cutting, and we define our stock usually by a relative size box, meaning it is slightly bigger than the part you're actually going to cut. And we'll go over that in more detail in just a second. Before you start to go and mess with the size of the stock, it is really important that you get the orientation of the Z-axis correct. And the X and Y axis, actually, the entire coordinate system. You really want to get that correct. You want the Z-axis to be pointing up from the material to the laser beam itself. Just like you could see on the screen right now, the blue facing up. All right. And then in terms of where the actual coordinate system is, that may or may not matter depending on some of the options you're going to choose in the post processor. So for now, I'm going to use what we call a box point, and I'm just going to pick the back left corner. All right. And for the stock size, again, for now, I'm just going to leave these settings as it is. We'll go over in more detail later how to change this and why you might want to change this. Okay. So here I have some stock. Now I'm going to want to go and apply some operations. And so we're going to go to cutting for 2D and say we're going to do a 2D profile. And for the tool, we're going to select the actual tool from our cloud library that we have here. And we're going to select this Glowforge laser beams that I made. And I have those 3 that I chose earlier that I made. And we're going to use maybe this 1/4 inch one and say, okay. The cutting mode right now is set to through auto, which is the same as saying, hey, I want to just cut all the way through. We're going to make a cut. You do have the option also to choose etch or vaporize, and we'll go over that in just a little bit. Ignore everything for feed rates. They do not matter at all for the Glowforge because the Glowforge is going to do that on its own. And in terms of geometry, this is where you're going to select what do I actually want to create a path for? Like what do I want to cut? So let's say I want to cut the outer perimeter of this particular object. I can pick the face of the object, or I'm going to exit out of there. I can pick the edge itself. Either one is fine. If you choose the face, keep in mind that it's actually selecting the outer edges and the inner also. you could see those arrows. It's selecting the outer and the inner loops. That could be good or bad depending on what you want to do. I like a little bit more control, so I'm going to choose to select just this outer edge for now. And you can see this red arrow. That red arrow is on the outside of this part because it thinks we want to cut, and we're going to cut around the part. All right, we want to keep the inside. If, however, it were the opposite, like for example, I want to select one of these holes, I want the arrow on the inside so that this hole is the exact right size. And you can change this by simply selecting the arrow. All right, you can choose inside or outside. So let's go back and choose that outside edge, and the red arrow is already in the right place, so we'll leave that. And then we're going to go to heights, and I'll tell you that none of this matters at all for the Glowforge, so you can ignore that. Passes, this one's really important. In particular, sideways compensation and compensation type are really important for this to work properly. Okay, so for this to work, you're going to want to choose left, center, or right. Now, left and right do the same thing when it comes to your Glowforge. Either of them are basically like saying, yes, I want kerf compensation. I want the path for the cutter, the laser beam, to be slightly offset from the edge that I want so that the result gives me exactly the edge that I want. And center is like saying turn off the kerf compensation. I want the laser to follow that edge exactly. Do not move it anywhere, inside or outside. Now, left or right, they're the same thing. They really just change the direction of this arrow, but Glowforge is going to choose the path on its own anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But make sure left or right for choosing kerf compensation, and center for no kerf compensation. Now, it is very important if you choose left or right to do the kerf compensation that the compensation type is set to in computer, not in control. If you set in, I don't want to give you the super nerdy stuff, but if you set in control, the kerf compensation will not work properly. So make sure it says in computer. Then lastly, for linking, which is the final tab here, you're going to want to turn off lead in and lead out because the Glowforge is going to choose all of the paths automatically. It's part of what they do in the cloud, which is amazing. And so you just want to turn those off so that we don't have any kind of conflicting information happening. Just turn those off. In fact, if you get some warnings or errors that your toolpaths are not creating properly, chances are it's because you added lead in or lead out. So just go and turn these off. So for now, I'm going to say OK. And if we look at this particular setup, you're going to see that I now have a blue edge that's showing the path of the laser beam, and it is bigger than the part that I want to cut because in this case, my fictional laser beam is super, super big in diameter. Right, it's super wide. And so I have to move the laser out a little bit to be able to get to this. And if you want to see this a little bit more visually, we can actually go and simulate this. And right now in this simulation, the yellow is showing you the width of the laser beam as it's going around. And you could see that the very inner edge of the laser beam is what's going to be touching the edge that you want to have on your final part. And so this is really what kerf compensation is all about. Right? This is the entire point of it. All right. Now, if I go and I add additional toolpaths, I'm going to go and say additional 2D cutting. This time, I'm going to pick, let's say, this circle right over here. And for the tool, instead of saying through auto, I'm going to choose etch. And when I choose etch, it's very similar to saying, like, I want to score the part, meaning I don't want any kind of kerf compensation. I want to follow the edge exactly. So when I choose edge, if I go over to this passes area, it automatically chooses center instead of the left or right. Remember how I said that center is like turning off the kerf compensation? So it automatically turns that off. So that's one less thing I have to do. And then lead in and lead out are automatically turned off also in this case, so I don't have to do anything. That's perfect. Now we're going to do this again. I'm going to say 2D profile. This time, just to show you something different, I'm going to pick this face right over here. And again, this time we're going to do vaporize, which is the same as like engraving. I'm going to make sure that I turn off sideways compensation or the kerf compensation to make that center. And I'm going to turn off my lead in and my lead out. And I'm going to say OK. And now I'm good to go. Now I do have a warning here, but I'm going to ignore that. Everything is actually looking really good. Okay, so let's go and post-process this and see what it looks like, okay? So we're gonna go and not select any individual path. Instead, I'm gonna select the entire setup, and I'm going to post-process it. We're going to use the new post processor, the Colorific. We're going to save the file onto my desktop. We already made 2 files, I believe, so we're going to make number 3. And we're going to leave all of these options exactly how we had it before. And so I'm going to say post, make number 3, and then we'll go and take a look at this in Illustrator to start. And this looks perfect. I see 3 operations. Everything here is automatically grouped. And so here I have the pink box, the green circle, and the blue. Everything that wanted to have curve compensation automatically has it. And the colors are all different, so I'm going to have different operations on the Glowforge user interface. So let's go and take a look at that on the Glowforge side of things. We can go and upload file number 3, and it looks, hold on, wait for it, everyone. There we go. Looks fantastic. All right, excellent. Now, you'll probably notice that the parts look a little bit off center. So this is a good time to tell you about how Gareth made this post processor so it does its centering. If you notice, even though this box here is not centered and the group of everything together isn't centered, this area here, this square that we started with the rounded edges, that one's actually perfectly centered. And the reason is because if we go into Fusion 360 and we look at our setup, you could see here that the stock itself, we just use this one part to make our stock. So if we change this and we say, let's also add this block there, and then we go and regenerate our toolpaths, we'll go and create file number 4. We're not going to change any of our settings at this point. Now we're going to go back into the Glowforge user interface and we'll upload file number 4. And now you'll find that the combination of the 2 blocks, those together will be centered. All right. So the way that Gareth set up the centering is based on the stock, right? Wherever the stock is. It doesn't take into account at this point the origin of the stock. It doesn't really matter, but the stock itself is going to define the centering relative to the Glowforge bed. All right. And just to prove that out, we're going to go back into Fusion one more time. We are going to change the origin of our stock here, and we're going to use, let's say, the front right corner. We're going to regenerate these toolpaths again, and we're going to nope, not create any toolpaths. We're going to just take this and post-process it, and then we are going to, I believe we're at file number 5 now, and we're going to just post that. Yeah, we are on file number 5. We're going to go to the Glowforge user interface and upload that. Wait for it. Excellent. And you can see here that our parts are centered just like before. Nothing changed, even though I changed the coordinate system. And the reason that it did that, the reason that the coordinate system did not matter, is because if you look at Gareth's options, you could see that one of these here is called auto stock point. And what that's going to do is try its best to ignore the coordinate system itself and center everything anyway. All right, so just keep that in mind. We'll actually go through this in a little bit more detail momentarily. So let's actually go and change some of our options and see what we get. Now remember that our stock is just barely bigger than our parts right now. So if I go and I edit, nope, not edit. We go to post-process this again. Now I'm going to turn off the use work area option. And I'm going to explain what it does, and then you'll actually see this firsthand. Use work area is automatically going to set your artboard size to be the artboard size indicated here, 279 by 495. Now, this is in millimeters, but if you were to see this in inches, it would be roughly 11 by 19 and a half, or the Glowforge bed size, right? And so what we're doing here is creating a work area that automatically just uses the Glowforge bed. And it doesn't really affect very much on the Glowforge user interface, but it does very much affect things in Illustrator or Inkscape and things like that. So let's go and create file number 6. We're going to post that. And let's go in Illustrator. And right now we have file number, I guess it's number 3 open. Let's open number 5, the second to latest. And you can see everything is nice and centered. And my artboard is roughly the size of the Glowforge bed, right? 19.5 by 11, right? The slightly off because of the metric to inches conversion. If, however, I open the latest file where I turn the setting off to use the work area, you're going to see that the artboard itself is just barely bigger than our parts. In fact, the artboard itself is exactly the same size as the stock. So as a reminder now, or I guess as like a big note, is that we just saw firsthand that if you change this option right over here, use work area, if you turn it on, it'll make your artboard the size of the Glowforge bed, no matter what. And if you turn it off, it'll make it the stock size. Now, why is that helpful to you? Well, if you're going straight to the Glowforge user interface, it doesn't really matter. You just go straight there. But if you're going to be doing some post-processing in Illustrator or Inkscape, it might be helpful to you for your artboard to be the right size from the very beginning. And so in that case, you can get it to be the right size in one of two ways. You can just say, yes, use work area, and it'll automatically be the right size. And it will automatically center everything, right? Because we turn this auto stock point, the centering, on. But if we want, we can actually say no. Right, I'm actually going to cancel out of this. And we could say no, and we can edit the stock itself to match the Glowforge bed. So I could say stock, and instead of relative size box, I can make it a fixed size, and I can make it 19.5 wide by 11 tall. And right now, we are choosing to, for model position, to center everything, okay? And I'm going to say okay. Notice, and this is going to matter in just a few moments, notice that the origin is in the corner, the bottom, the front right corner, not the back left. This will be important. We're going to regenerate our toolpaths. We are going to post this. And in this particular case, we're going to make sure that work area is turned off. And the auto stock point is also going to be, let's turn it off. All right, so if I turn all of this off, and I believe we might be on file number 7 now, we're going to make file number 7, correct? And we're going to go and open this in Illustrator to start. Excellent. And you're probably noticing that my part is off in space, right? And the reason it's off in space, well, first of all, the artboard itself is the correct size. And it's the correct size not coming from the post processor because we selected to use the work area. It's the correct size because the stock was the right size, right? Because we are not using the work area. But the reason that the model is off in space in the wrong place is because my origin is this corner instead of that corner. And if you recall from the Glowforge user interface, this corner here is the 0, 0, and you could see that on the rulers, right? So for that to work properly, I need to edit my setup and change the origin to be that corner over there and say, okay, regenerate my toolpaths. And now I can do my post-processing and say we'll make file number 8. And we'll go and upload that to the Glowforge user interface. Give that just a moment, of course. And now it's centered again. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why go through all the headache to make the stock the right size and to make sure the origin is in the right place just to have everything be centered again, right? And I would, actually Gareth would very much agree with you on this. Why would you do that? You could just use the settings and center everything automatically. However, if there are any power users out there that would like really fine control over the placement of their cutting paths relative to the Glowforge bed, this is how to do it. So let's go back into Fusion. I have my coordinate system set up to the corner, the back left corner, which is correct. I have my stock as the right size, which is also correct. But now I can actually change the model position from center to maybe offset it from the right side by 1 inch, or maybe offset it from the front side by 1 inch. Now I can actually control, let's actually look at this at a better front view, exactly where I'm going to wind up having my cutting paths. So let's regenerate our toolpaths. Let's re-post process this. I believe we're on file number 9 now. Excellent. And then we're going to go and import into Illustrator our file number 9. And now you can see that I end up with exactly the same placement in Illustrator as I do in Fusion 360. And if I go to the Glowforge web app and I upload file number 9, I'm going to end up with the same positioning as well. So if you don't really care about having the exact positioning, I think that I would tell you, and Gareth, of course, would also tell you, don't bother with making sure the stock is the right size. Don't bother to make sure that the origin on your stock is in the right location. You don't have to worry about any of that because in Fusion 360, when you go to post, you could just say, yes, auto stock, meaning put in the center, and yes, use the work area, and everything will just be centered automatically. If you really do want more control, then say no, and you'll get all that control. Right? So to each their own, whatever you prefer is totally fine by me and everyone else, of course. There are a couple of other options here that we didn't cover yet that I think are important, so let's cover those. You see this in blue, SVG stroke width is set to 1, and my memory is not the best, so I don't remember if I covered that yet. I'll just tell you again, or maybe for the first time, that is going to, just in Illustrator or Inkscape, set the stroke width so you could see this a little bit more clearly versus like the original file, maybe this, nope, might have to go to the originals, where everything is like really thin and therefore hard to see. Just keep that in mind that it's just going to be on like Illustrator or Inkscape and not really on the Glowforge user interface. Other things, remember how I mentioned how if you're going to choose to do curve compensation, it's really important that the sideways compensation is calculated in computer instead of in controller. This, if you select yes, is going to just verify that you selected that correctly. If you didn't on even one of your 2D profiles, it will not make your SVG. Instead, it'll give you an error and tell you that you need to fix it. And I like that because if you turn this off and you accidentally had the sideways compensation in controller, one of your toolpaths that you thought was curve compensated will actually not be curve compensated. So I recommend turning this on, and if it won't create your SVG for you, chances are it's because your sideways compensation is not set correct. One more thing. You have flip model on or off. So why is that important? Well, this particular model, it's important to me that everything is face like this. But if you recall in Illustrator, when we brought in the very first file using our original post processor, let's go and find our actual files here. Hold on just a second. There it is. Okay. So let's zoom in to that. And you can see that this is actually upside down. And so oftentimes you might end up having a coordinate system that's slightly off. So like, let's say, for example, you have a setup like this, but for whatever reason, you have the Z facing the wrong way. It's upside down like this. Instead of having your image come in incorrectly, you can actually fix that really easily. So let's go and intentionally post-process this and show you the wrong result, and then we'll fix it. We're going to post-process this. I believe at file number 10 at this point. We're going to, and we'll turn that off, and everything else is looking good. So let's post this. We are going to just use Illustrator for now to do this verification. We're going to open up file number 10, and you can see that this file is upside down. It's like mirrored, because as well, it's just upside down. So let's actually go back into Fusion, and we could say, well, let's repost. I could fix this in two ways. I could either go back and edit my setup and fix the Z-axis to face up, or I could just say, well, let's just come over here and flip the model, say post. We're going to make this file number 11. Excellent. And then open file number 11, and this should be right side up again. Something moved around here, but it is right side up. All right, so flip is just going to flip your model right side up in case it's upside down. All right, so far we covered a whole lot. All right, let's go over what we covered. Why this post processor is awesome, right? Because you can go straight from Fusion 360 over to the Glowforge with curve compensation, right? That's amazing. With different colors for different operations, that's amazing. With fills versus strokes, depending on the type of operation you want, that also is amazing. We also figured out how to be able to create different laser beams based on the different kerf compensation you want. So, one for medium proof grade walnut or versus some other material. We also talked about how to create a setup in Fusion 360. We also talked about how to create 2D profiles in Fusion, whether you're choosing to do kerf compensation or not. And actually, in case I didn't cover this in enough detail, if you go and edit any of your profiles, you can always not only change the tool to change the kerf, you can also change the cutting mode to through versus etch versus vaporize, and of course change the kerf compensation from left/right, which is like saying on, or center, which is like saying off. Okay. We also covered how to install the post processor and then how to actually go and use it. So overall, we covered, I believe, everything. This was a lot of info all at once. I hope, very much hope, that you guys enjoy this post processor. Gareth worked really hard on it, and it's incredible. We do hope that it will eventually become part of Fusion 360, that'll just be built in. In the meantime, you'll have to download it and install it separately, but I hope that you get a whole lot of benefit from it and that you enjoy it. As always, we're always welcome for feedback, so please send your feedback and your comments and suggestions. Thank you so much for your time. Happy lasering.